Record. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'd like today to talk about fasting at length. This is, as I mentioned, our last Bible study prior to our entrance into the Great and Holy Fast, into Great Lent. And what I'd like to do is speak about fasting historically, its origins, and talk, secondly, about its relationship to Holy Communion, which is always a very popular topic amongst Orthodox and even non-Orthodox Christians. And finally, I would like to look at the various kind of rules that have developed over time, and rules that I think we can use as guideposts in facilitating our own fasting practices and our own disciplines as we enter the Great and Holy Fast. So what I'd like to do first is just make a few general comments regarding fasting in general. We know that fasting is among the oldest religious practices in history. When I say religious practices, I don't only mean Christian, but non-Christian as well. It's interesting, however, that nowadays, in a society that is dictated so much by consumerism and consumeristic thoughts and materialism, and in general, an overall lack of self-restraint, the discipline of fasting can be widely and is often widely unappreciated. The church certainly does assert the importance of fasting in our spiritual life. And so the question is, why is the church so adamant about us following the fast? I mean, just a kind of, again, a general remark is that those of us who appreciate the importance of being disciplined and ordered in our lives, in our family life, professional life, and so forth, we know how important it is to have order and discipline. And fasting in itself is an important discipline that helps us kind of put our spiritual life in order. The primary purpose of fasting, and again, I'm just talking from a history of religion's point of view, the primary purpose has always been a kind of a self-catharsis, right? A kind of a self-cleansing of an individual or groups of people, groups of individuals who are to perform a particular action related to a deity, right? Related to God in some way. Speaking from a Judeo-Christian view, why do we even need to be cleansed? Why did the priests in the Old Testament and the Levites who served the temple, why did they need to be cleansed? For one, I think we can safely say that it was to be found worthy to serve God, the sense of being cleansed, purified, to serve him who is all pure and all dignified made sense. So to be made worthy to serve God, to serve him with clean hands and with a clean body. Also, to serve God by cleansing one's mind. So to serve him with a clear mind and with good intentions. And finally, to serve God with a pure heart, not to have any anger or enmity or any kind of negative feelings towards another person. In a nutshell, we can say that the purpose of fasting is to be able to give our very best to him who is the very best. So what does it mean to give our very best to God? Certainly, one thing is to build discipline. When we are disciplined, we are at a point where we can give the very best of ourselves to someone. And with building discipline, we learn something known as the O word meaning obedience. This is a word that is often ridiculed by modern societies, especially as we said, in a very consumeristic environment. To be able to be obedient to a higher power. Um, and this is often mocked. It's ridiculed by people who think that obedience is a sign of weakness, whereas we as Christians see it as it being certainly a strength and an indication of true faith. To give our very best, fasting also helps us to improve our concentration. It's interesting, there have been scientific studies also done, which indicate that a person who fasts or abstains from food quantity and certain kinds of food actually has a better ability to concentrate mentally and even emotionally and spiritually on a particular activity at hand. So it helps to improve our concentration by kind of allowing our minds to stay alert. And fasting teaches us the greatest of all lessons, which I would argue is to learn dependence upon God for everything. To learn to be dependent. And again, modern society challenges this and says independence, disobedience, anarchy, all these kinds of ideas seem to be strengths, whereas the church says obedience to God, dependence upon God for everything are the greatest strengths and indication of true commitment and success. So again, by way of kind of general remarks, we see that fasting again started out as a means of catharsis of the individual to perform a holy act or actions, and it eventually came also to mean becoming the very best we can be by not punishing ourselves, but redirecting our focus, kind of realigning our concentration on from the things that fade to the things that remain eternal. I have a few icons, actually, photos, they're memes from St. John Chrysostom and St. Basil that I will share with you by sharing my screen here in a few minutes. But I wanted to kind of go into the earliest evidence of fasting practices known to the church. So naturally, we go to Scripture, and we know that Christ himself fasted. We know the disciples fasted. They observed certainly the fasts that the Jews did. And we kind of get an indication of how the Jews fasted from one of the earliest, arguably the oldest church order known as the Didache, or the Didache, the teaching of the 12 apostles. This is a beginning of second century church order. It was a Syrian document that was composed first in Greek. And in the Didache, we learned that the Christians are to fast on Wednesdays and Fridays, And this was because, as the church believed, Christ was betrayed by Judas Iscariot on Wednesday. He was crucified on Friday. And as Christ himself says in the scriptures, when the bridegroom is absent or taken from uh, his followers, then his followers will fast. So Wednesday and Friday were the two designated days from the very early Christian era, from the time of right after the Pentecost, straight through the history of the early history of the church. Christians fasted on Wednesdays and Fridays, and it says specifically in the Liturgical that they are not to fast like the well, what's the expression used? The infidel, is it the infidels? The infidels um, who fast on Mondays and Thursdays, the unbelievers. The Monday and Thursday were the two Jewish fast days. That's when the Jews fasted. These were also the market days when the Jews would go into the marketplace and be active and do their work and shopping and what have you. So Monday and Thursday were the 2 days that the Jews fasted, and the Christians are not to fast like the unbelievers, but they are to fast on Wednesday and Friday. From early on, however, it does not appear that there was a connection to fasting had any connection to Holy Communion. This was the case because everyone just naturally received communion on Sunday. It was unheard of for someone to not to commune the holy mysteries, not to receive communion, and certainly there was never the case where someone would not receive communion because they didn't fast. So the connection between fasting and communion was simply not existent at this time. We're talking very early first century. Uh, and but the Christians did fast on Wednesday and Friday, but this was not seen as a communion fast. It was simply seen as the manner by which the Christians remembered Christ's betrayal and Christ's crucifixion. So, in other words, the people in the first century truly lived the life in Christ weekly. So before I move on to the fasting and relationship to communion, let me share with you some beautiful teachings of St. Basil the Great and St. John Chrysostom on fasting. They've written a lot more than what I'm going to show you here. I have 4 icons that I would like to show you. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll see the let's see, we'll see the icons. So share. Okay, so let me calendar out of there. Okay, you should all be able to see my screen. And so here are the icons that I'm going to share with you. All right, let me start with St. Basil. All right. You can all see my screen, I hope, right? All right, and he says, St. Basil, who was the great Archbishop of Cappadocia, one of the 3 hierarchs, this is on one of his homilies on social justice. He says, I know many who fast, pray, sigh, and demonstrate every manner of piety, so long as it costs them nothing, yet would not part with a penny to help those in distress. So here, Basil is speaking about a kind of Pharisaism that existed even during his time, where people kind of went through the motions of religiosity and yet did not understand the important horizontal span of philanthropy that is needed between people, Christians of the church, and them wanting to and them helping others who are in need. So, he says you have the vertical down, but not the horizontal. So this is a very telling teaching, I think. And a lot of these fathers after the 4th century speak along these lines. Let's look at another quote. I guess we have Chrysostom next. So here's St. John Chrysostom, who says, "Do you fast? Then feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, visit the sick, do not forget the imprisoned, have pity on the tortured, comfort those who grieve and who weep, be merciful, humble, kind, calm, patient, sympathetic, forgiving, reverent, truthful, and pious, so that God might accept your fasting and might plentifully grant you the fruits of repentance." So, in a way, what St. John Chrysostom is saying, similar to St. Basil, that fasting is not just about food and how what you do for yourself, like the Pharisee, right, in the 2 Sundays ago, in the parable. He says, if you're fasting, then it means that you are not simply abstaining from food, but you are to do good, because fasting and doing good are one and the same thing. In fact, there's an insinuation here that if you're fasting from food, then the money that you normally would use to buy food for yourself, give that money over to those who have need. And so buy food for the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, make the effort to visit the sick, whom you know are sick, those who are imprisoned, those who are tortured. Don't add to their suffering. Show them pity, show them comfort, give them a good word. Comfort those who grieve and who weep. In other words, be there in everyone else's time of need, because fasting is cannot be fathomed, cannot be done if there is no action. The prophet Isaiah, in his first chapter, towards in chapter 1, actually, uh, uh, lends his mouth to God, and the Lord says, "Cease doing evil, learn to do good." So it's not enough simply to stop doing bad things, and it's not enough to simply engage in religious activities. Like even in that same chapter, God says, "I am tired of your jubilees and your celebrations and your incense." He says, "Is an abomination to me." He says, "I don't want these things. I want you to show philanthropy towards your fellow human being." So this is St. John Chrysostom, and I have a couple more that I'll share, so please indulge me here for another minute or so. This is, I think this one. This is a little one. It's a little too little. Okay, fasting is a medicine, St. John Chrysostom says, as beneficial as it is. Oh, sorry, fasting is a medicine, period. As beneficial as it is, it becomes useless because of the inexperience of the user. So this is a warning, and it's a kind of a sharp warning because it says a lot of people fast, but they don't know what it means to fast. They're inexperienced in understanding the whole concept behind fasting in the Christian church. He says that fasting can become useless. You could possibly lose weight from fasting or gain weight, but he says it really doesn't help if you don't do it in the right way. And here again, he's referring to not only engaging in prayer and going to church, but also in embracing one's fellow human being. And the final one is this, I think. Yes. He says, fasting is the support of our soul. It gives us wings to ascend on high and enjoy the highest contemplation. God gives us a cure by fasting. The cure that St. John Chrysostom says, I would argue, the cure is our kind of moving away from our impulsive desires and kind of whims and kind of our concerns for this world. And this becomes a sickness. It can get to the point where we become so obsessively compulsive or just overly concerned with things that don't last that, this becomes an illness. And he says that fasting allows us to enjoy the highest contemplation, which for many of the saints is what is called theoria, the Greek word theoria, which is where we get the word theory from. To be able to engage in true communion with God by contemplating his greatness. This is the highest calling that anyone can attain.
Georgia Lectures.
The highest calling, this is the highest calling that anyone can attain. So this is what St. John Chrysostom here shares with us. So fasting has many, many benefits, as we've seen, and certainly benefits that require obviously some work to be done. I'm going to move on now here to stop sharing. All right. And I'm going to now talk about the eventual relationship of fasting with Holy Communion. The connection, it would seem, between fasting and Holy Communion developed roughly around the 3rd and certainly into the 4th, by the 4th century. Evidence of this is when a particular saint of the church known as Saint Cyril of Jerusalem, he is actually the bishop in the latter quarter of the 4th century, the bishop of Jerusalem. He was the bishop when Egeria, the famous Spanish pilgrim, made her way to the Holy Land to observe Holy Week there and services and how the Eastern Christians did things and how they worshiped. So St. Cyril came up with this this expression, and he said that the Eucharist that we receive is the awesome sacrifice of the Lord, which can make one's hair stand on end. In other words, he says in Greek, this is the Greek expression is ifrikodestati or ifrikodestatos thesia. In other words, communion, which was understood to be the body and blood of Christ, reverenced certainly from antiquity, now takes on a kind of a different aura. The aura that it takes on is that it is fire that not only can consume sin, but it is fire that can consume the unworthy. And all of this kind of develops as a result of a lot of the 4th century fathers reinterpreting St. Paul's communion chapter in 1 Corinthians, the institution narrative that St. Paul gives us there. So in other words, communion is now something that is to be truly reverenced, respected, never to be shunned, never to be mistreated, always to be given the utmost care in the lives of the Christians. And because communion is so sacred and so important, then the Christian must exert every kind of ability, or what's the word, take every care to prepare properly to receive communion. Something so sacred cannot be simply taken in by hands that are dirty or by a mouth. Again, I'm kind of paraphrasing some of the early fathers like Chrysostom. How can your mouth take in this communion when your mouth is used to slander another person? How can your hands touch the body and blood of Christ when your hands were seen doing evil, doing all kinds of evils? How can you look upon the broken body of the Lord and his blood when your eyes have participated in treacherous acts and so forth. So we start seeing, because of the elevation of communion to a higher status, in a sense, fasting now becomes more and more necessary to prepare us for this great sacrifice, for Holy Communion. But even from the 4th century onward, the Christians still did observe a strict Wednesday and Friday fast. This fast was still the most ancient and was the one that was observed. During Pascha, during Holy Week, by the 4th century, and even a little earlier, initially, when Christians celebrated Easter, they celebrated by keeping a vigil. So a Saturday night vigil into early Sunday morning. The way they kept a vigil was simply reading the Passion Gospels, the Passion narratives. What happened was eventually this vigil went from Saturday night and went backwards to include Good Friday, which of course is the day of our Lord's crucifixion. And then from there, they went even further back to the events leading up to the crucifixion, what we would commemorate on Holy Thursday. And then they went to Holy Wednesday with the betrayal. And so all of a sudden, you have an entire week of preparation that the Christians did. This week of preparation added days of fasting, what came to be Holy Week. The next step beyond that was to then go beyond Holy Week and to include 40 days of fasting, because those 40 days leading up to Holy Week were the 40 days that the catechumens typically were observing. They were fasting strictly to purify themselves for their coming baptism. So the Christians, in order to show solidarity with these catechumens, also began to fast with them. So the next thing you know, there's a 40-day fast preceding Easter, what we've come to accept as the Great Lent. And then, as more feasts were added to the ecclesiastical calendar, more 40-day fasts or periods of fasting developed. For example, the next one after Easter is Christmas, the Nativity fast, that begins with what is called Philip's fast. So from the middle of November through December to Christmas Eve. So these fasting periods began to develop. And so these, and all of these were done as a way of preparing for the great feast. Now, I want to put in an important point here, if I might, and that is that in the church, there is an intimate connection between fasting and feasting. A feast cannot occur without there being some preparatory period leading up to that feast. Unless we fast, we cannot celebrate. To put it in very practical terms, if someone eats a burger every day during Lent, eating lamb on Easter Sunday won't really make, it really won't even, people won't even think of it as being anything special because you're used to eating meat. But if you fast, that lamb really tastes good on Sunday afternoon or whenever you sit down to celebrate Easter with your families. The point being that this interplay between fasting and feasting is as ancient as the church itself. The Jews practiced it as well in their various lunar feasts. So the feasting and fasting, we normally eat after we receive communion. Prior to that, right, we were observing some kind of a fast. So, but all of a sudden now we have all of these fasting rules, right? Fasting rules began to develop for communion, And how is it that we have one family says, well, I have to do a 3-day fast and I have to do a 1-week fast, and others say, no, 10 days, and others say 2 weeks. And we have all of these rules, and they always run to the priest and they say, Father, which is the correct fast? So to explain this, the fasting rules for communion were developed, but they began to be generalized when, for a family or a village, when a spiritual father or elder gave a canon of fasting, meaning a penance of fasting, to an individual based on that individual's spiritual life or sin, let's say. And then that individual who went to that holy monk or elder felt compelled to return back to his family and kind of breaking, the priest didn't break the confession, the person did, and said, that holy elder told me that this is the way to fast. The elder told that individual, you are to fast for 3 days and then receive communion. This is a specification. It's given as an individual penance to an individual. But the misnomer, the misunderstanding was that, oh, this is for everybody. So this holy elder said, this is how we fast. That's not what he said. He said, this is how you will fast based upon this particular fast, that based upon your particular sins that you have committed. So the confusion a lot of times happens because people think that the rule that they received from their elder, from their spiritual father, was the general, kind of the general practice of the church. That is absolutely false. This was not the case at all. The truth is that, again, the ancient Christians fasted on Wednesday and Friday. A very helpful rule of thumb is, if we fast during the week and observe the fasts of the year, by the week I mean Wednesday and Friday, outside of a Lenten period, and if we observe the fasts of the year, meaning Lent, Christmas, and so forth, the other two are the Apostles' Fast, and then the fast of the Panagia in August, then we can receive each Sunday. We must also remember that a lot of people, because they go to church on Sunday, they feel, oh, I have to at least fast because I have the rule. I know that the rule of the church, which is not a rule of the church, is that I have to fast on Saturday. So a lot of people who received this canon from their spiritual father thought that this was a general rule. Oh, Saturday is a day of fasting. Saturday is not a day of fasting. Holy Saturday is a strict day of fasting, the only strict day of fasting of the year, but not every Saturday, not any Saturday of the year. And as a result, then people will not fast. People do not fast, are not supposed to fast on Saturday. Let me throw another monkey here into another wrench, or whatever, however that expression goes. Fasting is also about obedience, and not fasting is also about obedience, which is a major virtue in the spiritual life. If the church tells us to fast, we fast, as we said, to build discipline, not to follow a set of rules that in the end may not make any sense if we don't do them conscientiously and consciously. Fasting teaches us the discipline of obedience. If the church tells us as a mother to fast, we fast. If the church tells us not to fast and we choose to fast, we still cannot receive communion. This might come as a shock to some people, because because we're going to say, but we fasted, and isn't that what we need to do before communion? No, we need to be obedient before we receive communion. That's the point. If the church tells us you don't need to fast, you will not fast on this day, like Easter. Like some people will say, oh, there's a divine liturgy every day during Bright Week. So I'm gonna, let's see, I'm gonna have communion on Easter Sunday, and then you know what I'll do again Wednesday. So I'll fast on Bright Monday and Bright Tuesday. The church says, no, you don't. You do not fast on Bright Monday and Bright Tuesday. But I fasted so I can receive communion. Technically, you cannot receive communion if you've disobeyed what the church has already taught. So that's another thing to remember, that fasting is not about rules. It's about building discipline and building the ability to have obedience. And now, finally, we're going to come now to various degrees of fasting, or the disciplines of fasting. These degrees of fasting have developed over centuries, and I think it's important that all of us, especially as we enter Holy Lent, that we kind of put ourselves, if you will, into one of these degrees or categories of fasting. I'm going to share these with you here in a moment. These degrees of fasting are applied for fast periods. They can also be applied if our spiritual father, let's say, or our father confessor, tells us to observe a communion fast. So these are all different disciplines. There's not one that is better than another. It's a discipline that exists to assist us to grow closer to God. Fasting also is what I like to call the two Qs, the letter Q. It is quantitative, meaning it depends on how many, quantitative, how often we eat daily. And it's qualitative, meaning what kinds of food we can eat. So the quantitative has to do with the number of meals we take a day. If, for example, we have, let's say we're fasting, and let's say we love eating lobster, and let's say we eat 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 lobsters. And that's the only, I mean, not this, I mean, I don't know that anyone could do that, but, and we only ate once a day. That's not fasting. But it's fasting food. Yeah, probably fasting food, it's shellfish, but quantity matters. So, and then quality, which is, I think, more people are more concerned about, well, can I have this and not this? You know, most people look at the quality, but we must remember that fasting is also about quantity. The monks, for example, in monasteries, the monks and the nuns, when they fast, they only take one meal a day. And it's usually after Vespers, which means in the latter part of the afternoon. They've basically done a full fast from the night before, when they had their last meal, all the way to the afternoon. Right after Vespers, they will take that one meal. So they, in a way, practice this intermittent fasting, which probably many of you are aware of, and some of you might even be doing, where you fast for a 16-hour period, and then you find yourself, eating again, let's say after 12 or after 1, and then you have a small window of eating, as it were. It's somewhat similar, but not exactly the same as what the monks do. So without further ado, let's look at these degrees of fasting. So we have, I'm going to mention here 5 categories. We'll start with the least strict and go to the strictest. What I would call zero, the 0 degree, is basically no fasting. It means anything and everything is allowed, food-wise. We can have anything that we have in our house to eat. It could be meat, it could be dairy, it could be oil, it could be anything at all. The first degree of fasting after 0 is the next category, and that basically is no meat, no red meat, and no chicken. Dairy, however, is allowed. Oil, olive oil, is allowed, and dry foods, like nuts and fruits and vegetables and bread are allowed. So basically, this first tier says no meat, meaning meat and chicken. The next tier is the second tier, and this says no meat, meaning beef and chicken, no dairy. So the dairy is taken out, meaning no butter, no cheese, no eggs, right? But fish is allowed. Oil is allowed, and dry foods, nuts, fruits, vegetables, etc., are allowed. This second tier is the default tier for major feasts that would fall during a period of fasting. In other words, this month we have the Feast of the Annunciation, right, of the Mother of God. So this is a major feast that it will always fall during Lent. It's just the way the calendar is set up. So during this feast, we can have fish on this day because it's a great feast day. Well, for us, we're going to do it on the Sunday before, so we'll have fish that day. So this is the second tier. The third tier is no meat, no dairy, no fish, but oil is allowed. Dry foods are allowed. This tier, tier 3, is the default for the Saturday and Sunday, the Saturdays and Sundays of Lent. Because on Saturday and Sunday, the fast is relaxed to a degree. We're still fasting from certain kinds of food and even from quantity. We can have 2 meals a day. The monks typically will have 2 meals a day on Saturday and Sunday. That's also facilitated by the fact that they also have a divine liturgy in monasteries on Saturday and Sunday. So since the liturgy is in the morning, they can eat after liturgy, and then they can have their second meal after Vespers that evening. So this is the default for the Saturdays and Sundays of Lent. And then we come to the fourth tier: no meat, no dairy, no fish, no oil. This is what's called the dry fast, the xerophagia, as they call it in Greek. It means you just have dry foods and nuts and vegetables and fruit and bread and nothing else. The final tier is the most severe of all, and that is a full fast, meaning you simply don't ingest anything, just the air you breathe. That's about it. But normally it's at the fourth tier that at which typically will involve 1 meal a day, which is what the monks and the nuns will observe during Lent. So these are all kind of different categories, food fasting categories. One is not better than the other. So if one works and we can be consistent in following this particular fast without becoming sick, without becoming cranky, without without losing our focus on taking care of others, and to focus more on prayer in Christ, then that is the fast that we should be following. A lot of times too, these degrees of fasting can be brought up in the sacrament of confession, or in a discussion with the parish priest or with one's spiritual father or father confessor. So again, the important point is to be consistent, to enter into a fast that feels comfortable, not 100% comfortable, because obviously there is a sacrifice that is made, but that allows us to do the fast and do it joyfully, do it with a sense of positive attitude, with hopefulness, and with a strong sense of prayerfulness. My final comment and we'll open it up, as I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion here. My final comment is, how should we be preparing? So, generally speaking, for Lent, and the key word here is discipline. We should all be following, if we are fasting and have placed ourselves into one of these tiers of fasting, one of these degrees, we should be following a prayer rule. Fasting without a prayer rule is non-effective. It simply becomes a good diet for some of us. And while dieting is important and can be cathartic, if we're going to do it within the context of the church, we need to accompany it with prayer. Included in the prayer rule is something I mentioned in one of our previous Bible studies, and that is to pray the service of Holy Communion in our service books. We can also access this. There are many apps, and we can also access this prayer service of Holy Communion online. But it is a good practice to pray the service on the evening before, during Compline, and also on the day of church, so before we come to church, if time allows us to. In addition to fasting, food fasting, we should be doing readings. So reading from a spiritual book that we may have wanted to read, but we never got around to it, or we just felt, maybe intimidated by it. But picking up a book other than scriptures, kind of add that as a devotional reading, like St. John of the Ladder, for example, St. John of the Ladder, or the writings, the letters of Saints Barsanuphius and John, or really there's so much that is out there. So taking a reading, a devotional reading that we can do, and then also involving ourselves in charity. And I know our community does beautiful work with reaching out to the greater community to kind of share Christ with other people. This is a practice that should become part and parcel of our lives at St. Spiridon as much as we are able to. And I'm extremely thankful for all of you who do take the time to really do this outreach ministry that we do. So being involved in charity, and simply, again, finding opportunities just to do random acts of kindness. Remember those bumper stickers? Some people said, oh, those are just, Protestant wishy-washy things. But, I don't think so. I really believe that those random acts of kindness are important because they keep our souls and our hearts fertile and staying closer to God. And let's be real. Those acts, those opportunities present themselves because God puts them in our way to remind us how important it is, right, to do these good things. So staying away from evil thoughts, evil actions, and doing good every opportunity we get in fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah. All right, so and may I also share with you finally this is going to be read. This passage from the Gospel of Matthew will be read on the Sunday of Cheese Fair. That's in 2 Sundays from now. And it is an appropriate gospel because it talks about fasting and how we should fast. And I'm just going to read what Jesus himself says about fasting. He says, and when you fast, he doesn't say if you fast, right? So fasting is expected of us, even by our Lord. And when you fast, do not look dismal, like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces that their fasting may be seen by men. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by men, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So ultimately, fasting is between us and God. It's not for us to show off, it's for us to show our best self to God and to ask Him to help make us better. And I am going to stop there and promise not to say anything more by way of lecturing because I've said a lot, but I did want to make this presentation as comprehensive as it could be. So I will be quiet now and welcome comments and questions and try to keep my answers brief.
I just had a question real quick.
Sure.
It's not directly on fasting, but um, so like, why do we celebrate cheese for a week? Like, why do we have a week where we only have dairy, like no meat and all that, like in the last week, the lead up of Lent?
So that's a very good question. So normally as we move towards Lent, what actually goes on is that the church is gradually reminding us to start cleaning out our ice boxes and our refrigerators, in a sense. In other words, we're gradually, so look how the Triodion, right? How the Triodion started. We started out with Sunday of the Publican and the Pharisee. That week was fast free. We were able to eat Wednesday and Friday. So we're like, chomping away at all the burgers and lamb and meat we have. And then the next week, we go back to a regular Wednesday, Friday fast. And then this coming Sunday is Meat Fair Sunday. So the church says this is the last day to have meat, this coming Sunday until Easter. And then next week will be our Cheese Fair week, which means that the church is telling us, okay, you can start eating all the dairy that you have. And then by the time we enter into Lent on March 18th, we only have fasting food. So in a way, the church doesn't say, you cut the food cold turkey. It gradually brings us out of the fasting practice by kind of starting to limit us in the certain kinds of foods we eat. That's the reason behind why we have cheese fair and meat fair and what have you. Even on Wednesday and Friday of next week, right? Wednesday and Friday of cheese fair, we can have cheese because it's a dairy week. We're just cleaning out all the dairy that we have. So that's the reason we do that.
Thank you.
Sure. Another comment or questions? There's no silly question or comment. Or
Just
if
about
you,
to say, I remember one time that my wife went and bought a gallon of milk just before we were supposed to stop drinking milk. So I drank the whole gallon of milk in like 2 days or something. Yeah. Yes. Oh my.
oh, that must have been, that can be intense. Well, I mean, yeah, yeah, uh, rules they're helpful, but they shouldn't also, I mean, we all know they shouldn't stifle us either. I mean, you have to be practical. Milk can spoil. So if you have to finish it, finish it, but God is not going to condemn us for having milk during Lent. I think mostly with Lent, I like to see it as how much of an effort do we make to show our uh, minor sacrifice to Christ for what he did for us. I mean, I kind of think of fasting in a way as kind of like our crucifixion. I mean, I know that I shouldn't sound overly dramatic, but it's kind of like our mini sacrifice for what he did for us. So, how much are we willing to do a little extra? So,
I can
any
almost see
co
during the process of fasting that the more uncomfortable an individual becomes, the more surface layer niceties and, the comforts strip away to where you can really get raw with yourself or the world around you, because you don't have the comforts to soothe your mortal mind. I know taking away certain passions would almost be harder for me than not eating. Like, if, thank God it's not the case, but if the Eagles were still playing, it'd be harder for me to go a Sunday without watching football than it would be to not eat meat.
Right.
And so during the Lenten process, should you also be considering things to not deprive yourself of, but certain passions to really get to the core of why you are doing certain, like if you like to pick up a basketball and go outside and play on, or not play golf on Sundays, to really focus in on prayer and what the season is. Would that be a part of the fasting process as well, or?
Yes. Yes. It's not about depravity or depriving ourselves really of things by way of um, punishing us, let's say, but it's a way of helping us redirect. Like if we enjoy doing something so much, we're saying that even above and beyond that thing that we really enjoy doing so much, we want to put Christ first. If but again, if we're depriving ourselves of something, that leaves a void. So we need to kind of fill that gap, right? Fill that void with doing something that may be more constructive. Like, for example, and you're all going to, I'm sure, I'll put a smile on your face when I tell you that every year I really try to, and I think Chuck can understand this. I really want to put agape. I want to fast from agape, which is my buzuki. Agape is what I call my buzuki. And it's difficult because, well, for one thing, she's right next to me right now as I'm speaking, and she's always here. And it's just natural for me to turn and take her and play the night away. But that's something I enjoy doing with myself for myself. What I could do is say, well, you know what? She's there. I mean, I could put her in the closet, but I'm not that cruel. So I'll keep her here, but I may then decide, okay, you know what? I'm going to fast from doing something that I want to do, and I'm going to go and see a movie with my wife, which we haven't done in a while. You're going to say, but is that fasting? Well, yeah, because I'm doing something, and fasting doesn't have to be a miserable experience. It can be something very joyful. If we can share with others something that is enjoyable by both, meaning something that is constructive, something that is spiritual, something that we don't do as often and yet we know is helpful for both of us in our spiritual lives, then we will do that. Whereas, taking an instrument and just kind of playing and just it's almost kind of a selfish activity. So I'm kind of struggling with that, but just to let you know that it's something that can be part of fasting.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, it's redirecting our attention and telling Christ, yeah, my sixth string, or in my case, my eighth string, is important to me, but you're a little bit more important. You're a lot more important. So here's proof of that. And you're not really proving it to God, you're kind of proving it to yourself. And sometimes it's hard to do that, especially when you've really embraced something so much. I use that as an example. I mean, there are probably a lot more serious things that we can sacrifice.
Father, if I may chime in, I know that Maria, Alex, and Michael and I grew up being taught a very strict fast. Anytime you did communion, by the time Sunday rolled around, you were starving, bread and water. And it was pounded into us. Then over time, that got a little bit more relaxed, but I think the lesson that I know I was taught, at least, that it's the focus is to turn inside and work on yourself, mind, body, and soul. And it's what you bring in your heart when you walk through the door of that church is what really matters. It's not what's in your stomach.
That's
And
right.
I was told that by a dear former and past priest of ours, that it's in your heart, not your stomach. And then the other thing is that because some people, I know we've seen them faint in church because they've starved themselves, and you don't do that to yourself. You've got to take care of your body. I mean, you have to do that, obviously. So there's a balance there, and again, I just take it back in where I'm at in my mind is mind, body, and soul. It's what's in your heart. And as far as I'm concerned about that bouzouki and the guitars, pick them up and play them because that's God's gift. Not everybody can do that.
That's a good perspective. Thank you for that. And it's true what you say, very true. So much of fasting, I think we focus on the what the Greeks call iserchomena, meaning what goes in.
Right.
It's what, right? We don't focus on, in Greek, we say exerchomena, meaning what comes out, meaning what comes
Yes.
out of our mouths, what comes out of our behavior.
Yes.
I don't mean vomit, right? I mean, you know what I mean, what comes out of us. So it's an important balance, you know. The church tells us to fast, but not to kill ourselves, not to suffer. It
My
tells
mother would get
us,
sick every year. Every year during Lent, my mother would be sick. And Dr. Law said, "Are you going to go to heaven faster because you're fasting?" Yes.
exactly.
That's why they call it fast.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. It's important. It's very important that we, Chuck, you brought up a very good point too, that, with regard to fasting, like, we should not become sick when we fast. If we try a fast, we place ourselves in one of these categories, and we do it for a few days, we do it for a week, and it's hard, or we start feeling lightheaded, or because we're not getting maybe the adequate nutrients. You know, every body responds differently to calorie intake and to nutrient intake. Then we know that we need to make certain adjustments. Do not be afraid to make the adjustments, especially if your doctor, let's say, you consult your doctor and your doctor says, you know what, we ran some blood work and your B12 is really down, and unless you eat meat, we're going to have to give you B12 injections or something like that. And it's, you know, which I know a lot of people that get the B12 injections. The point is that, you know, again, if you have to have meat for your overall health, your health has to come first. You can make an effort by adjusting your fasting practices. You might say, you know what, okay, I can have meat. Maybe I don't have to have it every day. Let me try on Monday and Wednesday and Friday not to have meat. The other days I will for my health. You're still making an effort. And then you can readjust what comes out of you as well. So there are adjustments that can be made. None of these rules, these rules are guideposts. The guidepost isn't law. It simply guides to help us navigate the course of the fast. We do our best. If we fail, it's okay. Did we try? Yes, we did. Can we try again? Yes, we will. Remember what we read at Easter, the homily of St. John Chrysostom, right? Whoever came at the first hour, in other words, whoever fasted from the very beginning, well, come into the celebration of Easter. The table is filled with all kinds of goodies to eat. Even those of you that fasted at the third hour, even those of you that came at the 11th hour, meaning you just fasted on Holy Friday, that's okay. Christ welcomes everyone who comes from the very beginning as to the person who comes to at the very end, because our hearts are in the right place. That is what matters. It's the intention and the effort. It's not just the intention. We have to make some kind of an effort. But as long as we do not become sick and we've grown from this experience, we have to have some kind of growth from the experience, right? So it sounds, some of you might be thinking, well, it sounds you're very liberal about this. And I don't know that the church is ultra conservative about it either. The red flags will always go up when someone is talking more about the food than about the spirit of the fast. That's when red flags should go up. When we start hearing these super orthodoxes, if you do this, it's hell. Where does it say that in the scriptures? Number one. Where do the fathers of the church say that? Number two. Nowhere. So these people have to calm down and start and take away their Pharisaical kind of mindset. So another question or comment. And the fast has to be joyful. We're really, really looking forward to this, right? Jesus says, anoint yourself, throw a party. We do, we call it Mardi Gras, right? Throw a party anyway. Every Sunday when we come to church, we celebrate, there's a party. Yay, we tone down the fast a little bit, but it's a time of jubilation. It's like Easter before Easter kind of thing. Any other thoughts or questions or comments or clarifications? Okay, thank you all. Chuck, before you came on, I asked our people if they wouldn't mind me recording it for the session for Ryan, and so everyone said yes. I'm assuming you're okay with it too.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sorry to be late. I had a couple of things I had to take care of, but I did want to jump in and participate. So
thank you. Thanks, Chuck. And so we actually have this session recorded. I think it went actually quite well. The questions were excellent. This was, I think, as a comprehensive a study on fasting that I've ever done. And so we can save this, and certainly I might ask Kostaki to share this recording. We won't be able to send it by email, but there is, I don't know if you guys know this, there's a website called WeTransfer, and it's a free website. It's called WeTransfer.com. And with this, there's a paid membership if you want a paid membership, but I don't think anyone really uses the paid membership. It allows you to send a file less than 2 gigabytes, which is massive, videos, mostly what people send, to any email that you'd like. And people then click on the link. The link is available for 1 week. They can then click on the link, take the entire file and save it to their computer and listen or watch it. And it's totally free. So I'll ask Kostaki to see if we can do that.
Couldn't you also put that on your YouTube channel?
Oh yeah, I suppose we could.
Because in that you can promote your weekly sessions too.
Oh, I did not think
good
about
idea,
that.
Michael.
Thank you, Michael. I didn't think about that. I'm assuming I can. I'll give it a shot maybe tonight. Yeah, because if the file, I don't think there's I don't know that there's a limit to the file, but this will be a big file because it's a big video file recording. So I'll try, and if it works, then maybe Maraki, maybe we can put it in the bulletin if people want to just go to the YouTube, and that'll get me some more subscribers. Maybe people can view it there. That's a great idea. I never thought about that. See? So
I can be your manager, Father.
I definitely
Watch out,
What's that?
Father. Watch out. He's Mr. 10%. Watch out for him over there.
No, no,
Oh,
no,
he-
it's up to 15 now, okay?
I was gonna
Oh,
say,
15. Okay.
he's such a nice guy. I'll give him the 15. That's okay. I'm not a business person. I know most of you are, and I appreciate what you all do. I'm just in my own little bubble here. So, all right, that'll be good. Okay.
And it wouldn't be bad, Father, to also, I don't have a problem get the recordings and post it if you can do it.
Yeah.
Post each of your sessions, the Bible
I
studies
Okay.
on your YouTube channel. I mean,
If okay, is
I
everyone
think it would be useful for all of us, even to review, even to go back and listen again, because sometimes you don't get it all first time around, you know. So to bring in those who were not able to make it,
Good idea.
and those of us maybe that want to go back and rethink and
You.
listen again, you know, I think that's a good idea. Put it on your YouTube. I mean, that's your space, so you decide that, but I think it would
Okay.
be helpful.
okay? Is everyone okay then with that, putting this session on YouTube?
Fine.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Very good then.
I have a
Then
lot
will-
of junk on YouTube.
Well, it's all good, and like you said, I like the idea of people being able to go back. I think that's very helpful. It's permanently archived there. Okay,
Yes.
well, thank you all very much. It was great seeing you, and hope this was helpful. We will have Bible study again in 2 weeks with the new fresh set of articles that we'll be studying, and we'll be in Lent then. So we'll see everyone then, and hopefully even sooner. Hopefully we'll see everyone this Sunday. We have church and of course the Mardi Gras coming up this Sunday, and then the Sunday after on the 17th is the Sunday of Cheese Fair, is the baptism of little Roman Weber. So we're looking forward to those two wonderful events. God bless and thank you all, and have a good week, everybody.
Thank you,
Good night.
Father. Good
God
night,
bless.
everyone.
Right.
Have a great night.